Over the last number of months, we've been preparing and getting ready, and so I'm excited to start this series on resiliency, Race with Resiliency. So just to start off, because that term might be something that you haven't heard, resilience or resiliency, either one, they're kind of interchangeable. Exactly what it means. It's a really simple concept. It's just the capacity to recover from difficulties. It's the capacity to recover from difficulties. Healthcare professionals and mental health professionals, social workers, folks who work with people have noticed that different people have different abilities to recover from challenges. When there's a natural disaster, when somebody has health problems, when there are problems in relationships, in school, or in work, when there's a sudden death, when there are challenges, people respond and bounce back in different ways. And they've studied this and they've learned more about this. And what we know now is that any one of us has a natural ability toward resiliency, but that we can learn resiliency. We can learn some skills to be more and more resilient through the challenges of life. One of the reasons we're talking about this topic is that the worship team, and I love working with a worship team as we're getting ready for a new series, talked about some different options, and this is the one that they chose because you probably know, or if you've been here the last couple of years, you know, that we've tried to start out the new year with a very relevant topic to our lives. 3 years ago, we talked about health and fitness. 2 years ago, we dove into the idea of dealing with stress. Last year, we dove into a difficult topic, but learned about addiction and recovery. And when that series was ending, we were talking about what we would focus on this year, and the team said, let's focus on resiliency, because it is so prevalent, so important to dealing with stress, and it's especially important for folks dealing with addiction to learn resiliency, to bounce back from the challenges of life. Because the truth is, it isn't a question of if we will have hardships, it's when. I mean, right? I mean, none of us get through life without dealing with some adversity. And I always remind folks, the church is real about that. I mean, we have a cross up at the front. It kind of reminds us that there is suffering, there are challenges, there are difficulty. Jesus experienced it, and we all will. But I was also reminded of this back in November. I don't know if you heard this. It made a lot of the news outlets covered this. The Center for Disease Control in the United States, they kind of looks at how we are doing in terms of health as a nation, reported that in 2017, they had compiled all the data by that point. 2017, we had the third year in a row when the life expectancy, that is the average age that we're expected to live, had dropped. 3 years in a row it had dropped. It is not dropped. This is a big thing. It has not dropped 3 years in a row since 1918, when the great Spanish influenza flu killed millions around the world. So, of course, they wanted to know, why is it that our life expectancy is slowly starting to drop? And what they discovered is there were two primary factors. We all know that healthcare is getting better, but there were two primary factors why our life expectancy is dropping. The first of them is the topic we talked about last year, addiction. In 2017, there were slightly more than 70,000 people who died of a drug overdose. And I was reminded of this even throughout this last year. 2 of our members lost a loved one to a drug overdose, and others have struggled with addiction. That is that 70,000, not to mention the almost 90,000 who died from alcohol-related deaths in 2017. Addiction is lowering, and the problems of it are lowering our life expectancy. But there was another factor that's on the rise that was lowering our life expectancy, and that's suicide. In every state in our country, suicide is on the rise. Every state except one. Actually, Nevada. Nevada stayed equal, which I find kind of amazing. You would think with Las Vegas in Nevada, that would be as worse as anywhere else. But they were level. But every other state, Maryland included, suicide is on the rise. And this is actually starting to lower us overall on the average. And I read that and I went, it is good that we are talking about resiliency, because resiliency is important, so important in both of those. How do we bounce back? How do we overcome and recover from the difficulties of life? Well, you may say, I could see why we would all need to learn some resiliency, but why necessarily in the church? Is this a church topic? Well, in fact, it is. Our faith is a primary factor. Our faith really affects how resilient we are to the challenges of life. We're going to look at scripture throughout this series about this, and I want to look at a passage that really kind of summarizes a number of things about resiliency in just a couple of verses. It's kind of the primary verse for this series. It's Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. And you'll see where resiliency is painted all over this scripture passage. The writer starts, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses," both in the past and in the present, we are surrounded by what someone in the healthcare profession would call a support system. I mean, we need a good support system to get through the challenges and the difficulties of life. We have this cloud of witnesses, the writer of Hebrews shares. Let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. This is another major factor in resiliency, moving beyond the challenges and the difficulties of our past and moving forward, because they cling to us, the weights and the sins. But he goes on, let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. This could just as easily say, let us run with resiliency the race that is set before us. The image is that life is a race, and we need to have that endurance, that resiliency through the challenges of life. The writer continues, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Can we look to a better source to overcome the challenges of life than Jesus and all that Jesus had, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross? How often do you see joy and cross in the same phrase, but disregarding its shame, and has taken away his seat at the right hand of the throne of God? Consider him who endured such hostility against himself from sinners, so that you is we, so that we may not grow weary or lose heart, because Jesus Christ came to show us God's love, to demonstrate God's love for us, we can be resilient. Another major factor to resiliency is knowing that we're loved and special, and that God and God's people are with us. This passage just kind of reminds us, summarizes for us what resiliency is really all about. And over the next number of weeks, we're going to dive into these topics. Next week, talking about finishing strong. The week after, having a big picture view of life, knowing the challenges come. The week after that, as Hebrews writes, being free of the weights of the past. The week after that, going the distance. And then we'll end with the value of relationships. And you'll find that these topics correspond exactly with the book that I hope you got your free copy of in the back, A Resilient Life. We'll dive into each of these topics, and I really hope that you get into A Resilient Life. It's written by Gordon MacDonald, who's a wonderful Christian writer, and I think you're going to find all kinds of blessings in it. One of the things you'll find in A Resilient Life is that he writes as an older man. He's an older man now. And so if you're a young person, you're going to read it, and it will help you to think about how you want to run your race that's in front of you. For those who are older, I think he's going to speak some of the same language of those who are older, who have been through some challenges, but yet still have more coming. It's going to be a great book. We're going to try and have a couple discussion groups where folks can talk about the book, kind of process it, or you could just do that with your family and friends if you want. But get into the book. I think you're going to find a blessing. We're also trying to line up some workshops. I had the opportunity to attend a workshop on suicide prevention at the Upper Chesapeake Hospital and found it a great blessing. We're going to see if we can line that up so all of us get some of this knowledge. And I just found out the other day, I was talking with a man who works for the Sheriff's Department who's working on resiliency in our community. And there's a wonderful movie called Resiliency. Talks about the challenges, the adverse events that we have as children and how to overcome them. We're going to try and have a screening of this movie to just get deeper, because the sheriff I was talking to, he was saying they want more and more community leaders to understand the value of resiliency. So I'm also going to apologize that I'm going to be away actually the next 2 weeks from the series. I ordinarily don't like to be away during the school year. I usually take all my vacation in the summer. But my older son is right now in Europe, and my wife said, you know what, we need to piggyback on him being there and go visit him, and it's an experience that none of my family except for her have been there. And I was a little hesitant, but I listen to my wife when she tells me things like, this is what you're doing. So we're doing that. I'm going to be away. But you know what? I think you're actually going to be glad that I'm away. Because next week in particular, we have an amazing guest preacher. And I wouldn't have reached out to her except for the fact that I'm going to be away. One of our team members, Vicki Mardernis, had read Tonier Kane's book. And it's an amazing testimony that she has. She actually travels internationally speaking about the power of resiliency, about the effects of trauma in our lives. And I reached out expecting that we were way below her normal pay grade and all, but she's going to come on out. She's going to be our guest preacher, and you're going to be blown away by her testimony. Just to kind of help you to understand the power of resiliency and to get you excited about Tonier. And by the way, if you know somebody going through hard times, you want to invite them next week to come and hear Tonier. But I'm going to show you a testimony that she recorded for the Christian Broadcasting Network that will just kind of inspire you about what's coming next week.
I never felt truly, truly loved or protected. I just wanted her to love me like I loved her.
Tonier Kane was the oldest of 10 children raised by a single mother in inner-city Baltimore. She longed for her mother's affection.
I wanted hugs. I wanted approval. I wanted to feel like, I just wanted to feel like I was your child.
But Tonier's mom was a drug addict and an alcoholic and wasn't around when Tonier needed her most after she was molested by a family friend. That left little Tonier to deal with the pain alone.
It took everything that a child believes in. Joy, happiness, dreams. I didn't know how to cope with it, so when I would find those half-filled cups in the living room, I would drink them. And what I realized that those memories and that feeling didn't feel as bad anymore.
Tonier and her siblings were soon taken from their mother and separated. She spent years bouncing between the homes of foster parents and family members.
My belief system was, I'm nothing, I never amount to anything, and this is how it's supposed to be for me.
When she was only 17, she married a 24-year-old man and got pregnant.
And I had my son, little Keith, and for the first time in my life, I had somebody love me. This baby would look up at me, he would grab my little finger, and he would hold on to it with his little fists, and he loved me.
But this love, the only love Tonier had ever known, was about to be torn from her. Tonier's husband left her and took the baby with him. Since he was the father, police said there was nothing they could do. and with no money for a lawyer, she had no way to get her child back.
Once little Keith was taken, I didn't care anymore. And I started to find something better to help me to cope, and it was crack.
She was instantly addicted. She ended up living on the streets of Baltimore.
Everything I did was destructive, so I was literally trying to kill myself, destroy myself. And I used it every chance I got. And as a result of that, I ended up prostituting. And my daily life was being beaten, raped, prostituting, or just crawling up on a dark corner, like a rat, wishing I was dead.
Tonier tried to quit drugs, but failed every time. She fell into a vicious 19-year cycle: drugs, prostitution, then jail. One thing hurt worse than anything else.
Every time I would have a baby, they would take it out of my arms. And no matter how bad you are on drugs and alcohol, when somebody takes your kids, they take your chances. And every time I had a baby, they took another chance from me.
During one stint in jail, Tonier found out she was pregnant again.
And now I'm terrified. Again, I'm about to lose another baby. I don't know how I'm gonna live through having another baby snatched through my arms. And I remember somebody saying, somewheres, when all else failed, why not look up to God? I always knew there was a God. I just didn't think he could love somebody like me. So I didn't expect his help.
But Tonier was desperate.
And I cried. I said, I don't know if you hear me, but if you hear me, please help me. Please help me keep my baby. And after I prayed, something in me started to stir. And I can't even say what it was, but I had a desire to start to go to the Bible study. I had a desire to start to go to all the church services and read the word. And I had a desire to be around people that was talking about God.
After several months of reading her Bible and going to church services, Tonier gave her life to Christ.
It didn't matter anymore about anybody else's love, because I had God's love. And he wrapped his arms around me all the time. And I had somebody I could cry out to, and I knew heard my tears, heard my cries. I had love all this time, and I didn't know it because I didn't know God.
Soon after, she went to an alternative to prison program that helps pregnant inmates to become better mothers. The program included therapy and rehabilitation from substance abuse.
Since my trauma has been identified, addressed, and treated, I have not even had the desire to use drugs and alcohol. Not even the slightest desire. None. Because finally, I was able to go to a program where they were able to address my trauma and treat it. And I was given an opportunity to develop my relationship with God.
Tonier has also reconciled with her mother. She now speaks internationally about her experience to help people get free from destructive cycles. She lives with her daughter Orlandra and says she is grateful to know God's love.
Because when I got that clear understanding who God was, what I realized, he has always loved people like me. When I realized that, my whole life changed. Nobody, nothing could have given me the joy and the love and the peace I have today. And that comes from Jesus.